I guess I wanted to first of all clarify my sheet. I didn't write that. My little introduction. I may have at some point told someone that I fight Satan, like jokingly, but I don't like lead with that. So like in case you're thinking like you're getting like The Exorcist, or I have some grand vision of myself, that's not true. I don't know, maybe I wrote that on the blog or something, but jokingly at some point. Also the football thing, I did that my first year of priesthood. I felt like it was a good way to get to know the community at Ritter, so I helped coach the football team. We did not win state. I should also clarify that. I wish we did. But the last 2 years, I've still kept my nose in football with our little parish football team of 7th and 8th graders at St. Malachi. So it's been a lot less intense, and a lot more free time, spare time when you're not coaching at the high school level. But that's been a real interesting way to get to know people. And I went to college at Hanover to play football there, so that's kind of a passion of mine, or a thing that I always liked growing up. Also, just a little bit more background. I didn't think to share this, but I was talking with some people before the retreat here, and I'm from a big family of 11 kids, and was sharing. Somebody asked if anyone else in the family is thinking about the priesthood, and the first 5 of us are all boys, guys now, I guess. My mom would probably still say boys. I have another brother who's actually in the seminary right now, and another brother joining next year. So, then I got the thing going. Well, what did your parents do? How did that happen? And I basically said, they were actually very. We went to Mass on Sundays, obviously. We prayed together at Sunday night. We had a family meeting to coordinate the calendar. It was an air traffic controller, trying to get it all worked out. And of course, we prayed there and before meals. And basically, that was it. It was like our faith was always a part of this, but it wasn't like we would walk around our house on our knees praying the rosary, or it wasn't. It wasn't. I just remember one time my mom and dad called us all in and said, my dad did that 3 times. He called us all in for a random meeting. The first time was he told us if any of us got an ear piercing or a tattoo, we would be thrown out of the house. He called us in, told us that, and he said, "Now you're dismissed." Like, joking. He was the dean at the high school before he became the principal, and so we all think that he had a bad day with a tattoo or something. Take that. I think it was just those who would perhaps be tempted in that direction. I think it was just the older siblings called in for that meeting. The other one, we were a little bit older, and he called us in and he said, "I know that your mom and I are not able to pay for your college, but none of you are allowed to major in sociology." I don't know what this is. If you are a sociologist, that's my dad's bias, not mine. I don't know if he read something. We think maybe he read something on the internet, or had a bad encounter with some article, or we don't know what happened with that one. But then the third time was before those, and he called us in and he just said, "Your mom and I want you to know that if you decide to ever pursue religious life or the priesthood, that we would totally support that, and we would be very proud of that." And I think that kind of, for me, it was always kind of a safe space. It was a possibility. Whereas I think I hear stories of guys. It was really a shock to me actually to get to the seminary and to hear stories of guys whose families were very hostile to them becoming. I didn't fathom that. So anyway, that was basically all that they did, and then of course teaching us through their lives about sacrifice and the way that they lived every day, and sacrificing for us certainly probably led to the vocation as well. But anyway, it's great to be here with you. And I'm filming this. Don't worry, you're not on film. I do have a blog, and the blog has been such an interesting little adventure. I would have never thought to do it, and Pope Benedict said, priests 2 years ago, said, he basically came out and said, if you're a priest and you know how to blog, you should do it. Well, it's like 90 seconds to sign up for a blog. It's quicker than getting an email account. I'm like, well, okay, so I'll do it. And you know, it's interesting too, because I think some people that read my blog will then like expect me to be this raging, conservative, angry person. And it took me back to what Pope Benedict, he wrote something, because he was writing lots of books when he was younger, and kind of like passionately defending the church. And he kind of said the same thing. He said, you know, people that read my books then meet me and they're shocked that I'm kind. And he said, you know, there's the difference when you're sort of writing to a general public about something or defending the church, as opposed to interacting with someone one-on-one and having a conversation with them. So in case any of you were afraid that I am a raging, angry, conservative priest, I hope to let you know that I think of myself as a very kind person. Maybe I'm not all, you know, everyone has their days, but anyways. And also people freak out with the camera. The reason I have the camera is because it's easy to film it. 5 minutes, they can put it on the blog, and instead of having to come up with something writing-wise, it's interesting that, and with the kids too that I teach, if I write it, they will not read it. If I video me reading what I wrote, they will all watch it. And not just the kids, college kids, and a lot of the young people out there. It's so, even with, it was so funny, like when I was teaching, if I would teach them something, they would all be like, if I filmed myself teaching it, they would watch it, you know, an hour-and-a-half class. They'd watch, some of them would, I don't mean all of them come storming to watch it, I know. But anyway, so I'm not a raging narcissist either. I don't like walk around, you know, oh, I'm the next Fulton Sheen, that's why I just do it because it's stuff to put on the blog and somebody will watch it. I've learned that. So anyway, now that we've done 10 minutes of introduction, what I wanted to talk about, this place is a special place to me. I was sharing with Sister and some others that Monsignor Moran is my spiritual director, so I've been coming out here for about 3 years to the Tower of Prayer. Wasn't expecting that. You should believe that. I feel so affirmed. I know that Monsignor will not see that because he can't. He has trouble turning the computer on. So I think I'm safe. But anyway, I've been coming out here for about 3 years, and I had no idea that we had Carmelite sisters in the Archdiocese until I started coming out here. And it's just been a wonderful relationship to be here, to celebrate. I've celebrated Mass a couple times when I've come out here, and stayed over there at the other house across the way a couple of years ago for a week-long retreat. And so this is a great place and a special place. It's become a special place for me in just about 3 years of my priesthood. The other thing that's been really interesting about it for me is that I have a real affinity, a devotion for Carmelite spirituality that had developed long before I started coming out here. It actually started in the seminary, and I kind of wanted to shape both of my brief reflections around that. I don't know how familiar you are with St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, but I kind of wanted to talk at the first time about St. John of the Cross briefly, and then maybe share a little bit about Teresa of Avila and how they both helped me, and maybe some things that it could help you all with your Lenten observance your Lenten walk. I always tell people that St. John of the Cross saved my life. And that might sound kind of dramatic. Well, it is dramatic, I guess. But what happened for me, I wanted to just maybe share a brief story with you from the seminary. C.S. Lewis has a great line where he says, no one really knows what it means, no one really knows what it's like to be bad until you've tried really hard to be good. And for me, I guess that's summarized for me like the first year or two in the seminary. I had been to like 1 or 2 daily masses, but I was kind of like, again, my family, that wasn't a big part, so doing other things besides Sunday Mass and my own personal prayer was not really on the radar, if that makes sense. But going to the seminary, now you go to Mass every day, and you're praying, and you're having days of reflection, and you're learning about God. It's awesome, and it's all there. But it was, for me, a big step up in terms of like what I was doing spiritually speaking, if that makes sense, okay? So I started doing that for, obviously, I was in that for about a year or two, and something, in that process, I would try and like go to daily Mass and say, okay, I really, now that I'm here on a daily basis, like when I was just going on Sundays, zoning out or whatever is totally, that's part of it. But now that I'm going to be a priest, I really have to be a person who can focus in, right? And really just kind of not be distracted during Mass. And I really ought to become, priests are holy. So I have to work on that and get to that point where I'm not distracted, where I'm always having, a kind of an emotional focus during the Mass, if that makes sense. Right here I will say too, I'm not sure if it's the same for Father Rick or not. For me, by far and away, the thing that is confessed the most to me in the confessional is distraction during Mass. And I always have to then, I kind of bring them around to understanding that is okay. We'll get to that in a minute. But I just wanted to say, I think a lot of people are at where I was at in the seminary. Kind of really frustrated. What happened was I tried really hard, but it wasn't working. And I would look around and see all these other guys, and they're like kneeling, and their eyes are closed, and they're just, really into or looked to be into the mic. So I'm like, oh. And trying really hard to do, I don't know what, to feel holy, to have a vision. I don't know what it was. I just thought I was supposed to be a better person, and Mass was now supposed to mean something and mean more to me and all that. So, anyways, I remember I went to my spiritual director at one point, about 2 years in, and I just kind of, I literally, I wasn't expecting it, and I had journaled something, and I started reading it to him, and I just started bawling. And it was all about, I try to see Christ in the Eucharist, or I try to pay attention in Mass, and I can't, or I don't do a good job at it. Basically just kind of coming to face the fact that it isn't about what I do, the work that I put into it, it's grace. But I had to basically try really hard to realize that trying really hard doesn't matter. It doesn't, it's the grace that God gives us is coming from God. It's not based on, and I guess maybe part of my problem was being a football player. Like, if I take dumbbells and I do curls, I get stronger, If I run the mile for a few weeks, I get faster at the mile. And so I was always used to putting more effort equals success. That's everything that I had kind of just been in my entire life. And I guess coming to face the fact that didn't work in spirituality, with our relationship with God. That it wasn't, that I could not force myself necessarily to improve, that it was all going to be from Him, a gift from Him. And so my spiritual director really helped me encounter that and kind of deal with that. In St. John of the Cross, they sell this book up there on the hill. I've seen it. St. John of the Cross, then I also kind of encountered him, and for about 3 years I read this just a little bit a day while praying, doing a holy hour or something like that. And St. John of the Cross then kind of helped reaffirm what my spiritual director told me that day when I finally broke down and realized that it wasn't about the work that putting work into our relationship with God is important. And that's what Teresa kind of helped balance that out for me, so I'll talk about her in the second one. But I wanted to share a little bit about John of the Cross, because I think that, again, his message, I believe, is one that America is going to need. We need as American Catholics, and as Western, European Catholics as well. But I think that his point, or kind of, he's got many points, but his idea, he's respected by Catholics and non-Catholics as the greatest perhaps spiritual writer spiritual writer of perhaps all time. And so I wanted to share a little bit with you about that, because I think it's important for us in our Lent and in the experience that we have during Lent. And it goes kind of to what I've already been talking about with my experience in the Mass. St. John of the Cross talks about how we often associate with an encounter with God. We associate with that sort of an emotional reaction, or sometimes like a vision type of a thing. You know what I'm saying? I like to call it the warm fuzzies. We associate oftentimes the warm fuzzies with an authentic encounter with God. And conversely, I think oftentimes what we experience is that if they're not there, if I don't have the warm fuzzies, then God is not working in my life. And I think that for me, one of the big struggles was I got to the point I was in the seminary and the warm fuzzies weren't there. And so I thought, I must then be doing something wrong. God must be punishing me, or God must be trying to say, I'm not doing enough, or, you know what I'm saying? So St. John of the Cross then comes in, and his message is that, in fact, we may be completely have no warm fuzzies, for lack of a better word, at all, even though God is working dramatically in my life in that instant. And I think that so many people need to hear that. I remember Mother Teresa, when she first was, even when she was alive, obviously, many in the press would talk of her as a saint. And it was like amazing, because it was like the only time you could be Catholic and get good reviews in the media, right? In our country, it was like if you were Mother Teresa, because obviously she worked with the poor, and in that we respond to that. We respond to the works that she was doing and so forth. But it was really interesting. Her diary came out a few years after she passed away, and I don't know if any of you have had the chance to read her diary. It's a beautiful collection. And she talks in there about how she had a very profound experience with Christ when she was really young. And it was kind of like a Moses in the burning bush experience. She felt like God was talking to her. Christ was talking to her and said, I want you to found this religious order and all of this. And basically she said that mountaintop experience lasted for about a week and kind of lingered in her life. But then she said for the next 50 years, she heard nothing from God. Nothing. She would go to Mass, 2 hours of adoration a day, work with the poorest of the poor, lead and found thousands of other religious houses throughout the world. In the midst of all that, though, she talked about how she never heard a thing. And reading her journal, I was able to read that, I think, as a deacon my last year in the seminary. And reading that book was just, had such an amazing, it was putting in flesh what John of the Cross is talking about. She talked a lot about how she despaired that God didn't love her. Perhaps she was worried that maybe that God was punishing her because, again, she wasn't having any sort of emotional or any sort of feeling-based contact with our Lord. But yet something was, she was able to persevere in faith and stay the course. And so again, I think, a lot of people talk about, they leave Catholicism or they leave Christianity in general. And a lot of times the reasons that you hear are based on, I didn't get that. I didn't get the fuzzies, I didn't get them here at this church or at that Baptist church or wherever it may be. And so people leave the faith, I think, because of that. And I think we need to hear St. John of the Cross sort of calling to us from the grave, or, well, he's a saint, so he's calling to us from heaven. I think that message and that idea is so important for us to recapture. And the reason I bring that up is in Lent, and I'm going to wrap it up here, this first session. I think what happens oftentimes in Lent is this. We're supposed to give up an attachment or attachments, something that, not because of the thing's fault, but because of our fault, we've maybe grown overly attached to something, and whatever that may be. And so oftentimes people will strip that attachment away. And then so there's a void there that we're encouraged to fill that with prayer or an opportunity, some kind of spiritual reading, or we clear that stuff away. And some people, like we all did it when we were 10, we take one attachment away and we fill it with another one, right? I know my family, being with 11 kids, we've had some great Lenten promises over the years. Giving up candy bars, and then it's a steady diet of Twizzlers and Starbursts for the rest of Lent. Just things like that over and over again. That's kind of like, everybody's been there, especially when we were young. I think we're a little, we even as adults though sometimes, I think we trick ourselves, but we're better at it. We don't do it as overtly as that. But a challenge, I think, always in Lent is to, first of all, make sure that when we strip away something, that we don't put something else in its place, another attachment. And then, so not only do we not put something in its place, we also are really, the whole reason for doing that is to fill that void with some kind of opportunity for spiritual growth. Whatever that may be, prayer, or reading the scriptures, or journaling, or spiritual reading, or going to daily mass, or the rosary, whatever. The church is a buffet, Pick from the buffet what is delicious for you. So we strip that away, and then, so I think what happens is this. We strip those attachments away. We fill it with an encounter with God, or we try to, but oftentimes what happens is people will try it for like 5 minutes, or, okay, now that I've given TV up for Lent, I'm going to go, okay, here I am, Lord. I'm not watching The Office right now, like I normally would be. I heard at church that I'm supposed to maybe try and pray, so I'm here, and I'm praying, so what do you have to say? I'll try it again. And then they wait, and there's like a few minutes of silence, and I don't mean that, this is in general. But we have this opportunity to more deeply encounter our Lord, and I think people try it for a few minutes, or for a few days, or for a few weeks, and they're like, well, I'm not getting anything here on my end. I'm not hearing anything, I'm not feeling anything, it's kind of quiet. And again, I think St. John of the Cross is there to tell us, to help us remember that something is happening, even if we can't perceive it. And that really is the whole sacramental church's worldview, you know? I mean, like, people will, you know, something is happening at Mass, even though we can't perceive it, right? It's bread, and it still looks like bread, and it still tastes like bread, and everything that I can sense sensory-wise, it's still bread, but something is happening to that bread, and it becomes our Lord, even though we may not be able to perceive that. And it's the same thing, I think, with our Lenten encounter with our Lord then. And John of the Cross helped me to realize that, along with many other people, Mother Teresa. So I guess a couple of questions that I wanted us to reflect on a little bit. First of all, what is it that we are filling that void with? That void where we have detached ourselves and have given ourselves more time now? What are we filling that space with? And then maybe another thing is just to share with each other, how do you cope with spiritual dryness, if you will, or spiritual, of not getting necessarily the warm fuzzies when you enter into that? And so I don't know, do we talk as tables?
Yes.
Okay. So the second part of this is on another book that really helped. It's just amazing how God works, you know, bringing things into your life. And I just grabbed this one time at the St. Minder's Life bookstore. You know, the Archdiocese gives you money to buy your books in the seminary. And I was like, it was still my first year as a seminarian, and I'm like, I still had and I'm sure Father Rick was the same. You think when you're early on in the seminary, if you buy the book, that will make you read it? And so I was like, oh man, and they give you like, you know, I think we get $350 for books. You know, I tell people we're professional readers in the seminary, is really what we are. But I remember that first year I had like all this money to spend on books, and I'm like, oh, that's a great title, I want to read that. It's kind of like when you're a New Year's resolution and you buy the gym pass for the whole year. This will make me go. And then in March you're not going anymore and you ask if you get a refund. It doesn't work. But anyway, so I bought this book, you know, and had no, and then of course, as with most things, it just kind of, I would see it and feel really guilty and be like, wow, I bought that. But then finally at the right moment, for whatever reason, picked it up, and it just really set me on a path and really helped form me as a priest and as a Christian. So then, Teresa of Avila, the same kind of thing. You know, I was like, oh, that's an interesting title. This happened to be Interior Castle that I picked up. She has obviously several other spiritual masterpieces as well. But I picked this up after St. John of the Cross, about a year or so later, and it's so crazy. They were friends. Teresa and John of the Cross knew each other and would talk regularly and share with each other. They kind of endured some persecution together and kind of helping try to reform the Carmelites at the time. But anyways, I really had the sense that Teresa helps answer, I think, or maybe even you could say correct, a problem that some people walk away with St. John of the Cross with. And you hear some people that will tell you, you know, you have to be really careful reading John of the Cross, that it can lead people to problems. And I wanted to share with you that as well. John of the Cross helped me realize that I was not the Antichrist, because I was not having emotional responses on command anytime I went to prayer. So that was great. He stabilized me and any fears that I had about just being some sort of evil, wicked person, you know, that okay, it's okay. Sometimes it's just a matter of being in the presence of God and sitting there in silence, St. John Vianney, people would ask him, what are you doing when you go to church and pray? He said, I sit in the presence of God, he stares at me, and I stare back at him. And I think John kind of helps people realize that that's okay. So that was great for me. It helped me in that regard. The problem, I think, that some people caution, and rightly so, and I think Teresa provides kind of the counterbalance to that, and she did for me as well. You can kind of get into the habit then, once you're sort of a veteran John of the Crossite, you can just sort of, and I found myself for about a year in this, kind of in that rut, and the rut is this: well, I'm not supposed to feel anything anyways, so I'm just going to kind of not worry about it. I'm not going to really seek out that interaction. I'll go to prayer, but I know nothing's supposed to happen. So the fact that nothing's happening is kind of like, it becomes okay. You know, you're not longing for necessarily that interaction because you were just a year ago on the other end where you thought that because you weren't getting it, that you were the Antichrist. Now you get in, John helps people, but then also if you just, and I don't think it's St. John's fault, it's how people interpret St. John, are kind of looking to be, so you can kind of get into this relational laziness with God, if you will. It's kind of like, well, you know, he never talks to me, he didn't talk to Mother Teresa, he doesn't, there aren't the warm fuzzies, I know I'm not supposed to want that, so, you know, I'll just kind of show up. And go, it can kind of lend to going through the motions, right? I don't know if that makes sense at all or not. And so that's a real caution, I think, that people, again, not John, but the people who, when you're trying to implement John into your own life, that's I think a caution. And I found myself in that, not even, I guess it's not even desiring the emotional sort of relational contact with God, if that makes sense, because my brain was now, I was now thinking that I shouldn't, if that makes sense, because it can mess you up or cause you to seek it. And John describes it like this: the warm fuzzies, he doesn't describe it like this, I'm interpreting. John says the warm fuzzies are like a drug. And if you're craving the warm fuzzies like a drug, and you can get addicted to that, and it can really mess you up. However, it's also not like, it's not completely bad in the sense that you should still want that interaction with God, if that makes sense. And so Teresa, here's the whole point, if I'm not making any sense. Teresa comes along and maybe because I wonder sometimes if it wasn't her work, wasn't coming out of a thing that she saw people missing the boat with John on. You know, it was like John, so I think they're kind of in order, in the order that I happen to just randomly read them. Teresa says this. She says, we should not be addicted to that emotional, the warm fuzzies. We should not make them mandatory for having a religious experience. We should not make them mandatory as like the be-all, end-all. They're not going to be what you should use to classify whether or not God is working in your life, which is what John says. But then she also kind of comes back and says, and John says this too, but I think some people miss it. She says, we should want that. We should kind of yearn or long for that personal interaction with our Lord, that we should long for the warm fuzzies, if you will. We should long for having a more direct contact. And I think that's Mother Teresa. She was in this spiritual desert for 50 years, but she wasn't happy about it. And I think that's Teresa is saying, if you're in the spiritual desert, know that you're not going to hell, that you're perfectly okay, but you should also not like being in the desert. You should not be content to be in the desert. You should be reaching out and desiring a deeper relationship with our Lord, while never falling into the trap of using simply human standards to judge whether or not it's actually present. There's a lot there. That's like the Carmelite order in like 20 minutes. But I think that for me has really shaped, and just, I mean, the conversion in my life, hearing these two great saints speak on these issues, has totally transformed me. Before the seminary, I had kind of a profound experience. I think most people at some point have some kind of burning bush Moses encounter, you know, where, and I remember literally like, because what happened was I was reading things and going to the seminary, and I had this John of the Cross, or I had kind of what we've been talking about. I was like, okay, Lord, you're going to need to give me something here, and I wasn't getting anything, and I was like, I want to grow closer to you, Lord, and I'm trying to do this reading and really enter into a relationship, and I'm not getting. So finally, one night, I laid on my bed, and I said, I'm not getting up until you reveal yourself to me. Yeah, it was like, I was a first-year teacher, so I was already emotionally unstable. And I had, you know, like, I only had like 20 minutes a night, you know, and I was just like, just working like crazy, and so, you know, I look back on it obviously, and it is funny, but I remember like punching the bed. I was like, because like I'm going to the seminary, and I still kind of struggling with this thing of like, you know, I have to feel better as a holier person. I have to feel holy if I'm going to go to the seminary, and I'm not feeling that. So finally, I remember laying there reading something, and I was like, and he did not disappoint. I don't recommend, again, John the Cross would say never do that. But I did. I got to this emotional sort of, like, I got to know you're real. And he did not disappoint. And I really felt a very, like, I would describe it as a vision even. And just felt something, very, you know, kind of throughout my body, and a real presence and a real encounter with our Lord. And it lingered for about a week, and it was just, I remember going to the next day. I don't think I had gone to a daily Mass at school yet. I literally like hopped out of the car, like running to Mass. I was so excited. And just, the kids were all kind of like looking at me, you know, like they could tell something had changed a little bit. They were like, why are you smiling? You know, you're a first-year teacher. You've been like, your hair's been falling out all year. You now seem like you're actually at peace. But anyway, but when that faded away for me, there was a long time again where I was like, what did I do wrong? You know, why did that go away? I must have done something bad. And John is, again, I think many people have that encounter, and most people think that we should be able to summon that back on contact, and if we can't, then God is punishing us, or that we've done something wrong, and that when we had that initial, that powerful religious experience, we were good people, and that now we're bad because we can't do that anymore. We can't summon that on contact. And so, I mean, and he talks about how the devil, John of the Cross talks a lot about how an overly it's really problematic if we think that way, and we can really be led astray very quickly if we're in it for the kind of religious high. If we're trying to get back to the mountaintop, and we think nothing less, we won't stop at anything less, we can really get ourselves into a lot of spiritual danger. And I just think about, what if I had never encountered these Carmelite masters, you know, these spiritual leaders and shepherds. I think that they saved my life in many ways. And so I hope that balancing act of John and Teresa kind of helping inform each other and helping us find kind of that narrow road of seeking to be in a relationship with our Lord, wanting to know that He's there, desiring that knowledge, but being content to sit in complete desert at the same time, knowing that we're not the Antichrist because we're in the desert. That in fact, that's where most people are. And that if we're in the desert, it may be the fact that He's working on us and trying to call us forward. You know, John said if we were always on the mountaintop, we would never desire to move anywhere. And I think that's me. If I continued to feel that way on my bed when I kind of like this, I would still be laying in the bed. You know, if he had not pulled himself from a human perspective, from my senses, if he had not pulled himself back away from me, I would have stayed there. And so sometimes he's calling us, I think, when we're in that desert experience, it's not that he's not there. It's not that he's not working on us. It may be that he's trying to continue to kind of call us to something different, or a deeper knowledge, or a deeper encounter with him. So I know I cut our break off early, and so what I wanted to do is give more time, and especially now that we kind of have the whole picture and the guy and the girls version of the spiritual life. Now that we have it all together, and they can complement each other, I think that maybe would aid us in some more in-depth discussion, and then we can kind of share with each other as a group in a few minutes as well. So we'll go ahead.